The advertisement in the Deadwood Pioneer sat folded in Winifred Thompson's carpetbag for 3 full days before she found the courage to respond. Her 42-year-old hands trembling as she considered whether a widow with silver streaking through her brown hair had any business answering a cattle rancher's call for companionship. Lead. South Dakota seemed a world away from the genteel parlors of Chicago, where she had spent her married years. But after her husband's death, 2 years prior, and the subsequent loss of their home to his gambling debts, Winifred had learned that survival mattered more than propriety. The year was 1881, and the Black Hills were still raw with the energy of gold strikes and cattle drives, a place where fortunes could be made or lost in a single season. Winifred had come west with her younger sister's family, but after 6 months of being treated as little more than an unpaid servant in their cramped home, she knew she needed to forge her own path. The advertisement had been simple and honest, placed by one Parker Olsen, a 21-year-old rancher seeking a wife who could handle the harsh realities of frontier life. Most women would have assumed he wanted someone young and fertile, someone who could give him a house full of children and work beside him for decades to come. Winifred assumed the same, which was why she almost tossed the paper into the stove, but something about the wording caught her attention. He wrote that he valued experience, character, and resilience above all else. He mentioned that his ranch was modest but growing, that he had lost his parents to influenza the previous winter, and that he found himself lonely in a way that the roughneck company of other cowboys could not cure. There was a vulnerability in those words, a quiet desperation that Winifred recognized because she felt it herself every morning when she woke in the narrow bed in her sister's attic, wondering if this was all that remained of her life. So she wrote to him. She told him the truth about her age, about her circumstances, about the fact that her childbearing years were likely behind her. She told him she could cook, manage a household budget, and had once helped her late husband run a small mercantile before his vices destroyed everything they had built. She did not paint herself as young or beautiful, but as capable and willing. She sealed the letter with wax borrowed from her sister's writing desk and posted it before doubt could stop her. 3 weeks passed without response, and Winifred convinced herself that her honesty had been foolish. Of course, a young man would want a young wife. Of course, he would read her letter and laugh, or perhaps feel pity for the desperate widow grasping at straws. She threw herself into helping her sister with the endless washing and cooking, tried to ignore the pointed remarks about finding her own way, and told herself that she would find work as a seamstress or perhaps a housekeeper in one of the larger homes in Deadwood. Then a telegram arrived at the general store in Deadwood, and the clerk made a special trip to her sister's home to deliver it. Parker Olsen had written that her letter was the most genuine he had received among dozens of responses, that her age concerned him not at all, and that if she was willing, he would meet her in Lead the following Saturday to discuss the possibility of marriage. He had enclosed enough money for her coach fare and a night's lodging at the boarding house if she needed time to decide after meeting him. Winifred's sister, Martha, read the telegram over her shoulder and sniffed with disapproval. A man of 21 wanting to marry a woman of 42. There's something wrong with him, mark my words. Probably simple-minded or disfigured or worse. But Winifred saw something different in those carefully chosen words. She saw a man mature beyond his years, someone who had been forced to grow up quickly, and who understood that partnership mattered more than the superficial measures by which society judged compatibility. She sent a return telegram accepting his invitation, and spent the next 4 days altering her best dress so that it looked less worn, pressing her good bonnet, and trying to calm the nervous flutter in her chest that felt almost girlish. The stage coach to Lead took most of Saturday morning, rattling over rough mountain roads with Winifred clutching her carpetbag and watching the pine-covered hills roll past. Lead was smaller than Deadwood, a mining town carved into the hillside where the Homestake mine had brought hundreds of men seeking their fortunes in gold. The main street was muddy from recent rains, lined with businesses that catered to miners and the occasional rancher who came to town for supplies. The boarding house where Parker had arranged for her to stay was a neat two-story building with whitewashed walls and flower boxes that suggested someone cared about making this rough place feel like home. Winifred checked in with the proprietress, a stout woman named Mrs. Callahan, who looked her over with sharp eyes but said nothing judgmental. "Mr. Olsen said he would meet you in the dining room at noon. He's a good young man, lost his folks last year. Works harder than any 3 men I know." That gave Winifred an hour to wash the dust from her face and hands, to change into her good dress, and to practice in the small mirror what she might say when she met him. Would he take one look at the lines around her eyes and the silver in her hair and regret his invitation? Would she see disappointment in his face, and would she have the strength to bear it with dignity? When she descended the stairs at 5 minutes before noon, her heart was hammering so hard she felt dizzy. The dining room was simple but clean, with 6 tables covered in checkered cloths and the smell of beef stew and fresh bread filling the air. A young man stood near the window, hat in his hands, his broad shoulders filling out a clean cotton shirt that had been carefully pressed. He turned when he heard her footsteps, and Winifred got her first look at Parker Olsen. He was not classically handsome, but there was something compelling about his face. His features were strong and honest, with clear blue eyes that reminded her of the sky over the prairie. His blonde hair was neatly combed back, and he had the tanned, weathered skin of someone who spent his days outdoors. But what struck her most was the nervous hope in his expression, the way he looked at her as if she might be the answer to a prayer he had been afraid to voice. "Mrs. Thompson." His voice was deeper than she expected, with a slight Scandinavian accent that suggested his parents had been immigrants. "Mr. Olsen." Winifred was proud that her voice remained steady. "It is kind of you to meet with me. The kindness is yours, madam, for coming all this way." He gestured to a table by the window. "Will you join me for lunch? Mrs. Callahan's cooking is the best in town." They sat across from each other, and for a moment an awkward silence hung between them. Winifred could see him studying her face, and she forced herself not to look away, not to apologize for the years that showed in every line and shadow. Let him see what he was considering. Let there be no deception between them. "You are older than I expected," Parker said finally, and Winifred felt her heart sink. But then he continued, "I mean that as a compliment, Mrs. Thompson. You have kind eyes, eyes that have seen hardship and survived it. That matters more to me than anything else." "You are younger than I imagined any man would be who would respond favorably to my letter," Winifred replied, finding her courage. "I must ask you plainly, Mr. Olsen. Why would a young man with his whole life ahead of him want to tie himself to a woman old enough to be his mother?" Parker set down his hat and leaned forward, his expression serious. "Because I do not want a child for a wife, Mrs. Thompson. I have been running my ranch alone for a year now since my parents passed. I have had young women flutter their eyelashes at me in town, girls who think ranching is romantic and who would wilt the first time they had to help birth a calf in a snowstorm. I have had mothers push their daughters at me, girls who giggle and cannot cook a decent meal or manage a household budget. What I need is a partner, someone who understands that life out here is hard work and that marriage is not about pretty words and courtship games. It is about two people standing together against whatever comes. His words were so forthright, so refreshingly honest, that Winifred felt something loosen in her chest. I can offer you hard work and loyalty, Mr. Olsen, but I must be equally honest with you. I likely cannot give you children. I had one pregnancy years ago that ended badly, and there were no others. If you want sons to inherit your ranch, I am not the woman for you. I have 3 younger brothers still in Minnesota, Parker said. If I need heirs, I can leave the ranch to one of them or their children. What I need now is someone to help me build something worth inheriting, someone to share the burden and the rewards, someone to talk to when the winter nights are long and lonely. Mrs. Callahan brought their lunch then, steaming bowls of stew with thick slices of bread, and they ate while continuing to talk. Parker told her about his ranch, a modest spread of 300 acres about 5 miles outside of Lead where he ran cattle and horses. He spoke of the work involved, the early mornings and late nights, the constant battle against weather and predators, and the challenges of getting stock to market. He did not romanticize it or make promises he could not keep. Winifred told him about her life in Chicago, about the early happy years with her husband before the gambling took hold, about the slow slide into poverty and debt, about the humiliation of losing everything and having to depend on family who resented her presence. She told him about the skills she had, the work she could do, and also about her limitations. Her back ached on cold mornings. She was not as strong as she had been at 20. But I am stronger in ways that matter more, she added. I know how to make a dollar stretch. I know how to preserve food for winter and how to doctor common ailments. I know how to mend and make do. And I know that a good partnership is built on respect and honesty, not on fleeting passion. Parker listened to everything she said, his blue eyes steady on her face. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment and Winifred braced herself for polite rejection. Instead, he said, Mrs. Thompson, I believe you are exactly the woman I have been hoping to find. If you are willing, I would like to ask you to marry me. Not today, not this moment, but soon. I would like you to come out to the ranch tomorrow so you can see what you would be agreeing to. If after seeing it, you still think we could make a go of it, I will secure a license and we can be married by week's end. Winifred's eyes stung with unexpected tears. You are certain. You do not want more time to consider. I have done nothing but consider for months, Parker said. I know what I need and I know what I can offer. The question is whether it is enough for you. She looked at this earnest young man with his weathered hands and hopeful eyes, and she thought about the alternative waiting for her. More months in her sister's attic, more pointed remarks about being a burden, more years of loneliness, and feeling like her life had ended when her husband died. Here was a chance for something different, not a fairy tale but something perhaps more valuable, a partnership built on mutual need and respect, a chance to be useful and valued again. It is enough, she said softly. It is more than enough. The smile that broke across Parker's face transformed him, made him look even younger and more vulnerable. He reached across the table and took her hand, his palm warm and calloused against hers. Then we have an agreement. I will come for you tomorrow morning at 8, and I will show you your new home if you will have it. That night, Winifred lay in the narrow bed at the boarding house and stared at the ceiling, wondering if she had lost her mind. The age difference was scandalous. People would talk. Her sister would be horrified, would probably say that Winifred was making a fool of herself, that the young man must have ulterior motives. But lying there in the darkness, Winifred felt something she had not experienced in years. She felt hope. She felt possibility. She felt like her life was not over, but perhaps just beginning a new chapter. Parker arrived precisely at 8 the next morning, driving a sturdy wagon pulled by two well-kept horses. He helped Winifred up to the bench seat with careful courtesy, and they set off down the muddy main street and out onto the road that wound through the pine-covered hills. The morning was cool and clear, the sky a brilliant blue overhead, and the air smelled of pine sap and earth. "The ranch is not fancy," Parker said as they drove. "The house is small, just 4 rooms. My father built it himself when they first came west, but it is solid and I have been working to improve it. There is a good well, a barn, and decent pasture. The cattle are healthy, and I have started breeding horses as well. It does not make me rich, but it provides a living." "I have not been rich in a very long time," Winifred said. "I do not need fancy, Mr. Olsen, I need secure." "Parker," he corrected gently. "If we are to be married, I hope you will call me Parker. Then you must call me Winifred." He smiled at that, and they continued in companionable silence, the wagon rattling over the rough road. Winifred watched the landscape roll past, so different from the flat prairies she had crossed to get here, so different from the crowded streets of Chicago. This was wild country, still being tamed, full of both danger and opportunity. She thought she could learn to love it. The ranch appeared as they crested a hill, nestled in a valley with pine-covered slopes rising on 3 sides and open pasture stretching to the south. The house was indeed small, a simple log structure with a covered porch and a stone chimney. The barn was larger and in good repair, and she could see cattle grazing in the distance, their shapes dark against the golden grass. It was isolated, miles from the nearest neighbor, but there was something peaceful about it, something that spoke of honest work and quiet satisfaction. Parker helped her down from the wagon and led her toward the house, his nervousness showing again in the way he kept glancing at her face, trying to gauge her reaction. "I know it is not much. It is honest," Winifred said. "Show me inside." The interior was sparse but clean, clearly maintained by someone who tried but lacked a woman's touch. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a cast-iron stove, a rough-hewn table and chairs, and a rocking chair near the fireplace. There were 2 bedrooms, one slightly larger than the other, and a small pantry. The windows were small but let in good light, and the floors were swept. "I have been keeping it as best I can," Parker said, "but I know it needs a woman's hand, needs curtains and such. Needs to feel like a home instead of just a place to sleep between work." Winifred walked slowly through the rooms, touching the furniture, looking out the windows at the surrounding land. She could see the potential here. The house was sound and could be made comfortable. The kitchen was workable, the stove good quality. The pantry was adequately stocked, suggesting Parker was not completely hopeless at managing supplies. She opened cupboards and drawers, taking inventory, her practical mind already cataloging what was needed and what could be improved. In the larger bedroom, she found a simple bed frame with a rope mattress, a dresser, and a trunk. The smaller bedroom had a cot and boxes of what appeared to be farm equipment and supplies. Parker stood in the doorway, watching her, his arms crossed over his chest. "If we marry," he said carefully, "the large bedroom would be ours. I would not expect you to share my bed immediately if you were not comfortable with that arrangement. I know this is a practical arrangement, not a love match. I would be patient." Winifred turned to face him, and she saw in his expression something that made her reconsider her assumptions. There was desire there, carefully controlled, but also respect, and a genuine attempt to be considerate of her feelings. This was not a boy looking for a housekeeper. This was a man who understood the complexity of what they were proposing. "Mr. Olsen Parker," she corrected herself. "I appreciate your consideration, but if we are to be married, we will be married in truth." I am old enough to know that physical intimacy is part of a marriage, and I am not so fragile that I need to be handled with excessive delicacy. What I need is respect and patience as we learn each other's ways. But I will not be your housekeeper who sleeps in a separate room. I will be your wife in all ways. Color rose in Parker's face, and she saw both relief and something else in his eyes. You are a remarkable woman, Winifred Thompson. I am a practical woman, she corrected, and I have seen enough of life to know that honesty serves better than false modesty. Now, show me the rest of the ranch. They spent the next several hours touring the property. Parker showed her the barn where he kept his horses, the chicken coop that needed a better fence, the smokehouse, and the root cellar. He introduced her to his cattle, pointing out the different breeds he was experimenting with, talking about his plans to expand the herd. He showed her the vegetable garden that was mostly weeds now because he had not had time to maintain it, and the small orchard of apple trees his mother had planted that were beginning to bear fruit. Everywhere Winifred looked, she saw work that needed doing, but she also saw potential. She saw a man who was working himself to exhaustion trying to do everything alone, and she saw how her help could make a real difference. More than that, she saw how lonely this place must be, how long the winter nights would feel with no one to talk to, no companionship beyond the animals. They stopped by a creek that ran along the eastern edge of the property, and Parker drew water for the horses while Winifred sat on a fallen log and watched the clear water burble over smooth stones. The isolation here was profound, but it was not oppressive. It felt clean somehow, uncomplicated. There would be no nosy neighbors gossiping about their age difference, no society matrons passing judgment. There would just be the work and the land, and the two of them figuring out how to build a life together. What do you think? Parker asked, settling onto the log beside her, careful to leave appropriate space between them. I think we could make this work, Winifred said slowly. I think you need help and I need a home and a purpose. I think we are both old enough to know that fairy tale romance is not what sustains a marriage. It is shared goals and mutual respect and the daily choice to stand together. I think we could build something good here. Then you will marry me. Winifred turned to look at him fully, this young man with his sun-weathered face and hopeful eyes, and she made her choice. Yes, Parker Olsen, I will marry you. His smile was radiant, and impulsively he took her hand again, holding it carefully as if she were something precious. I will do everything in my power to make sure you never regret this choice. And I will do the same, Winifred promised. When shall we do this? The circuit judge will be in lead on Thursday. We could be married then if that gives you enough time to prepare. I have very little to prepare, Winifred said with a slight laugh. Everything I own fits in one carpetbag. I suppose I should write to my sister, though I doubt she will approve. Will her disapproval stop you? No, Winifred said firmly. I am done living my life according to other people's expectations. This is my choice, and I am choosing hope over fear. They returned to town in the late afternoon, and Parker left her at the boarding house with the promise to return Wednesday evening so they could make final arrangements before the judge arrived. Winifred spent the next 2 days in a strange state of suspended reality. She wrote a brief letter to her sister explaining her decision, knowing it would cause an uproar but feeling strangely free in the writing of it. She mended the small tear in her best dress and pressed it again. She visited the general store and used most of her remaining money to purchase fabric for curtains and some basic household supplies she had noticed Parker lacked. The proprietor of the general store, a tall man with mutton chops and shrewd eyes, studied her carefully as she made her purchases. Heard you are marrying young Olsen, he said, not unkindly. Folks are talking naturally. Folks always talk, Winifred replied calmly. It rarely changes anything important. True enough, the man said. Parker is a good man, lost his folks hard, could use someone steady. That is what I intend to be. On Wednesday evening, Parker appeared at the boarding house in his best clothes, his hair still damp from a recent washing, looking nervous and young and endearing. They walked together to the small church at the edge of town where the circuit preacher was staying, and they made arrangements for the ceremony. The preacher, an elderly man with kind eyes, asked them the standard questions about their intentions and their understanding of the commitment they were making. If he thought their age difference unusual, he kept it to himself, perhaps recognizing something in their earnest responses that satisfied him. That night, Winifred lay awake again, but this time the anxiety was mixed with anticipation. Tomorrow she would become Winifred Olsen, wife of a cattle rancher, mistress of a small house in the Black Hills. Tomorrow her life would change completely, and she would be trusting her future to a young man she had known for less than a week. It should have terrified her. Instead, she felt a strange calm, a sense of rightness that she had not experienced in years. The wedding took place Thursday afternoon in the small church with only Mrs. Callahan, the preacher's wife, and the general store owner and his wife as witnesses. Winifred wore her best dress and carried a small bouquet of wildflowers that Parker had picked that morning. He wore a suit that had belonged to his father, carefully altered to fit his broader shoulders, and he looked at her throughout the brief ceremony with an expression of such genuine happiness that Winifred felt her eyes sting with tears. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife and told Parker he could kiss his bride, there was a moment of hesitation. Then Parker stepped closer, cupped her face gently in his work-roughened hands, and kissed her with a tenderness that stole her breath. It was not the passionate kiss of youthful romance, but something deeper and more meaningful. It was a promise, a commitment, a gesture of respect and hope. The witnesses congratulated them, and Mrs. Callahan had prepared a small wedding supper back at the boarding house. They ate surrounded by the handful of people who had witnessed their union, and if anyone thought the match strange, they were polite enough not to say so. The general store owner gave them a set of good kitchen knives as a wedding gift, and his wife contributed a warm quilt she had made. Mrs. Callahan gave them a jar of her preserves and a loaf of her excellent bread. As the evening grew late, Parker helped Winifred load her single carpet bag and her purchases into the wagon. The drive back to the ranch in the gathering dusk was quiet, both of them wrapped in their own thoughts. Winifred found herself acutely aware of the man beside her, of the fact that he was now her husband, that tonight they would share a bed for the first time. She was not a virgin bride, nervous about the unknown. She was a woman who had been married before, who understood the physical realities of marriage. But it had been more than 2 years since she had been intimate with anyone, and she was suddenly conscious of her age, of the ways her body had changed, of the silver in her hair and the softness around her middle. As if sensing her thoughts, Parker reached over and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "We do not have to rush anything," he said quietly. "Tonight or any night, I meant what I said about patience." "I know," Winifred said, "and I appreciate it. But Parker, I am nervous not because I am unwilling, but because I am 42 years old and you are 21. I'm not the young woman you might have hoped for." Parker pulled the wagon to a stop right there on the road and turned to face her fully. The sun was setting behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple, and in that soft light his face was serious and intent. "Winifred," he said, and the way he spoke her name sent a shiver through her. "Age is just numbers. What matters to me is the woman you are, not how many years you have lived. You are strong and capable and honest, You have kind eyes and a good heart. You are exactly what I wanted, exactly what I needed. Do not doubt that." "You say that now," Winifred said, trying to keep her voice steady. "But will you say it in a year, in 5 years, when I am showing my age even more and you are still young and strong?" "Yes," Parker said simply. "Because love is timeless, Winifred. It is not about how old we are or how we look. It is about the connection between two people, about choosing each other every day. And I choose you. I chose you when I read your honest letter among all those others. I chose you when I saw your kind eyes across Mrs. Callahan's dining room. I choose you now, and I will choose you tomorrow and the day after that." Tears spilled down Winifred's cheeks before she could stop them, and Parker gently wiped them away with his thumb. "I have not been chosen in a very long time," she whispered. "Then get used to it," Parker said, and he kissed her again. Longer this time, with more feeling, and Winifred felt something inside her that had been frozen for years begin to thaw. They arrived at the ranch as full darkness settled over the valley, and Parker lit lanterns to guide them inside. He had made an effort to prepare for their arrival. There were fresh wildflowers in a jar on the table, and he had aired out the bedding and swept the floors again. The fire in the stove was banked but still warm, and he quickly built it up while Winifred stood in the center of what was now her home, trying to absorb the reality of it all. "Are you hungry?" Parker asked. "I could make coffee, or there is bread and cheese." "I am fine," Winifred said. She set down her carpetbag and turned to face him, decision made. "Parker, I am your wife now. I do not want to spend our wedding night tiptoeing around each other, both of us nervous and uncertain. Can we just be honest with each other as we have been from the start?" Parker set down the kettle he had been holding and moved closer to her. "All right. Honesty. I am nervous because I care what you think of me, and I do not want to disappoint you. I am not experienced in the ways some men are. I have been too busy working to spend time with women, and I do not want to fumble this." His vulnerability touched Winifred deeply. She reached up and cupped his face, feeling the slight stubble on his jaw, the warmth of his skin. "I am nervous because it has been a long time for me, and because I am afraid you will see all my imperfections and regret your choice. But Parker, we are both human. We will both fumble. What matters is that we are patient with each other and honest about what we need." He turned his head and kissed her palm, a gesture so tender it made her heart ache. "Then let us be patient and honest together." They moved into the bedroom, and Parker lit the lamp on the dresser, adjusting it so the light was soft. Winifred unpinned her hair, letting it fall around her shoulders, and she saw Parker's eyes darken with appreciation. He helped her with the buttons on her dress, his fingers careful and gentle, and she helped him out of his jacket and vest. They undressed slowly, giving each other time to adjust, to accept, and when they finally came together in the simple bed, it was with a mixture of tenderness and curiosity that felt right. Parker was gentle and attentive, his youth showing not in clumsiness but in enthusiasm and wonder. Winifred let herself respond to him, let herself feel desired again after so long believing that part of her life was over. They learned each other's bodies in the lamplight, discovering what brought pleasure, what made the other sigh or gasp. And when they finally joined together fully, it felt like more than just physical intimacy. It felt like a true marriage beginning, a partnership of equals built on mutual respect and growing affection. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, Parker's arm around her waist, her head on his shoulder. Winifred could hear his heartbeat slowing, could feel the warmth of his body against hers, and she felt more at peace than she had in years. "Thank you," Parker murmured into her hair. "For what?" "For taking a chance on me, for answering my advertisement, for being brave enough to come here." "Thank you for seeing past the numbers to the person," Winifred replied, for valuing me as I am. Always, Parker promised, and he kissed her forehead. Age is just numbers, Winifred. What we have, what we are building together, that is what matters. Love is timeless. She fell asleep in his arms, feeling cherished and valued and hopeful about the future in a way she had not thought possible ever again. The next weeks passed in a blur of activity as Winifred threw herself into making the house a home and learning the rhythms of ranch life. She woke before dawn each morning to make breakfast, while Parker went out to tend the animals. She made curtains from the fabric she had bought and hung them in every window, instantly making the rooms feel cozier. She scrubbed and organized, preserving the jars of apples from the orchard and planning for the coming winter. Parker taught her to milk the cow, to gather eggs from the temperamental hens, to recognize when one of the horses was favoring a leg. She taught him that his socks would last longer if they were darned properly, and that a little planning with meals could stretch their supplies significantly. They worked side by side, learning each other's strengths and weaknesses, building the partnership they had promised each other. In the evenings, after the day's work was done, they would sit together on the porch and watch the sun set over the hills. Parker would talk about his plans for expanding the herd, about his hopes of eventually buying more land. Winifred would share stories from her earlier life, painting pictures of Chicago and the world she had left behind. Sometimes they would sit in comfortable silence, Parker whittling while Winifred sewed, simply enjoying each other's company. At night, they continued to learn each other intimately. Parker was an attentive lover, and Winifred found herself blooming under his desire and affection. The physical aspect of their marriage, which she had approached as a practical necessity, had become something more. It had become a way of expressing the growing emotional connection between them, a way of reaffirming their commitment to each other. One evening about 6 weeks after their wedding, they were sitting on the porch when Parker suddenly took her hand. "Winifred, I need to tell you something." She looked at him in concern, noting the serious expression on his face. "What is it?" "When I placed that advertisement, when I said I was looking for experience and character and resilience, I meant it. But I was not being completely honest about my reasons." Winifred's heart clenched with worry. "What do you mean?" "I told you I was lonely," which was true. "But the real reason I wanted an older woman, someone with more life experience, was because I was afraid." He paused, struggling with his words. "My parents' marriage was not happy. My father was harsh, demanding. My mother was young when they married, barely 17, and she spent her whole life trying to please him and never quite succeeding. I watched her wilt under his constant criticism, watched her lose herself trying to be what he wanted. When they both died, I found myself thinking about marriage, about what kind of wife I wanted, and I realized I was terrified of repeating their pattern." "So you sought someone older, someone more established in themselves," Winifred said slowly, understanding dawning. "Yes," Parker admitted. "I thought that a woman with more experience, with her own history and strength, would not be easily molded or dominated, would be a true partner, not a subordinate. And I was right. But Winifred, what I did not expect was that I would fall in love with you." Winifred's breath caught. They had not spoken of love. They had spoken of respect and partnership and building a life together, but not love. She had not let herself hope for love. "I know this was meant to be a practical arrangement," Parker continued, his grip on her hand tightening. "But these past weeks with you, learning about you, laughing with you, waking up beside you every morning, it has been so much more than I expected. You are so much more than I expected. And I realize that somewhere along the way, I have fallen completely in love with you. Not despite your age, but because of everything that has made you who you are, including those years of experience and hardship and growth." Winifred felt tears streaming down her face, and she did not bother to wipe them away. "Parker, I thought I was too old for love. I thought that part of life was behind me, but you have made me feel things I never expected to feel again. You look at me like I am beautiful even though I know I am not. You listen to me like my thoughts matter. You hold me at night like I am precious. And yes, I have fallen in love with you too. So completely that it terrifies me." "Why does it terrify you?" "Because I am afraid of losing you. Because the age difference means that in all likelihood I will grow old much faster than you. I will become infirm while you are still in your prime. And I am afraid that you will come to resent that, to wish you had chosen differently." Parker stood and pulled her to her feet, wrapping his arms around her and holding her close. "Listen to me, Winifred Olsen. I do not know what the future holds. None of us do. But I know that I want to face that future with you, whatever it brings. If you grow old faster than me, then I will be honored to care for you as you have cared for this home and for me. Age is just numbers. It is just a count of years lived. What matters is how we live those years, how we love each other through them. And I promise you, I will love you through all the years we have, whether that is many or few." She clung to him, breathing in the scent of him, soap and leather and the outdoors, and she let herself believe him. Let herself accept that this love, unexpected and unconventional though it was real and valid and worth embracing fully. "I love you," she said against his chest. "I love you so much it almost hurts." "I love you too," Parker replied, "and I will spend every day proving it to you." As autumn settled over the Black Hills, painting the aspen trees gold and bringing a chill to the mornings, Winifred's life took on a rhythm that felt natural and right. She and Parker worked together seamlessly now, anticipating each other's needs, communicating with looks and gestures as much as words. The ranch was thriving under their combined efforts. The vegetable garden had been restored and had produced a good harvest that Winifred had preserved for winter. The chicken coop had a new fence, and the hens were laying well. Parker had successfully sold a group of steers at a good price, giving them a financial cushion for the first time in months. But more important than the practical successes was the emotional richness of their marriage. They had become true partners in every sense, but more than that, they had become friends and lovers who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. Parker made Winifred laugh with his dry observations about the world. Winifred challenged Parker's thinking, encouraging him to consider different perspectives. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, building a shared language and understanding that deepened with each passing day. One cold October morning, Winifred woke feeling unwell. She pushed through the nausea to make breakfast, but Parker noticed her pallor immediately. "You are sick," he said with concern, guiding her to a chair. "Go back to bed. I can manage breakfast." "It is nothing," Winifred said, but the world spun slightly, and she had to grip the table for support. Parker's face filled with worry, and he helped her back to the bedroom, insisting she rest. For the next 3 days, Winifred battled waves of nausea and exhaustion unlike anything she had experienced before. Parker wanted to ride for the doctor and lead, but Winifred refused, insisting it was just a passing illness. But on the 4th morning, when the nausea hit again but was accompanied by a tender sensitivity in her breasts, Winifred felt a shock of recognition. She counted back in her mind, doing arithmetic she had not needed to do in many years. Her monthly courses had always been irregular in recent years, so she had not thought much of missing one. But now, with these symptoms, she allowed herself to consider a possibility she had thought long closed to her. She might be pregnant. The thought filled her with equal parts wonder and terror. She was 42 years old. She had assumed her childbearing years were over. The one pregnancy she had experienced decades ago had ended tragically, and there had been no others despite years of marriage. The doctors had told her it was unlikely she would ever carry a child to term. She had made peace with that loss and had assured Parker she likely could not give him children. But bodies were unpredictable things, and apparently hers had decided to surprise her. She said nothing to Parker yet, not wanting to raise hopes or fears until she was certain. But over the next week, as the symptoms persisted and even intensified, she became increasingly convinced. She would need to see a doctor to be sure, but in her heart, she already knew. The question was how Parker would react. They had married with the understanding that children were unlikely. He had said it did not matter, that he needed a partner more than he needed heirs. But would he feel differently when faced with the reality? And how would he feel about the risks involved in a woman her age carrying and delivering a baby? The dangers were real and significant. Finally, she could not keep it to herself any longer. One evening, as they were preparing for bed, she stopped Parker with a hand on his arm. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice shaking slightly. Parker immediately looked concerned. "What is it? Are you still feeling ill?" "Should I get the doctor?" "Perhaps," Winifred said. "But not for the reasons you think. Parker, I believe I am pregnant." Parker froze, his eyes going wide. For a long moment he simply stared at her, and Winifred could not read his expression. Then slowly, a smile began to spread across his face, growing wider and brighter until he laughed out loud with pure joy. "Pregnant, truly. But you said it was unlikely, that it probably would not happen." "I know what I said," Winifred replied, torn between relief at his reaction and continued worry. "And I believed it to be true. But bodies do not always follow expectations. Parker, I need you to understand the risks. Women my age can have difficult pregnancies. The chances of complications are higher. I might not be able to carry the child to term, or the birth itself could be dangerous." Parker's joy dimmed but did not disappear. He took both her hands in his and looked into her eyes with an intensity that stole her breath. "Then we will face those risks together. We will get the best care we can. We will be careful and cautious. But Winifred, if you are truly carrying our child, that is a miracle I never expected and never dared to hope for. You are not disappointed that I was wrong about my ability to have children?" "Disappointed?" Parker looked baffled. "Why would I be disappointed about this?" "Because it changes things. Because it adds risk and complication to what was supposed to be a simple partnership." Parker cupped her face in his hands, his touch infinitely gentle. "Our partnership stopped being simple the moment we fell in love with each other, and our child, would be a gift beyond measure. Yes, I am concerned about the risks to you. Your safety and health are more important to me than anything. But if you are willing to take this journey, I will be beside you every step of the way." Relief flooded through Winifred, and she pulled him into a tight embrace. They stood holding each other for a long time, both processing the magnitude of this unexpected development. The next week, Parker drove Winifred into Lead to see the doctor, a middle-aged man named Dr. Harrison who had a practice above the general store. After a thorough examination, he confirmed what Winifred already knew. She was indeed pregnant, probably about 8 weeks along. His expression was serious as he delivered the news. "Mrs. Olsen, I will be frank with you. A pregnancy at your age carries significant risks. There is a higher chance of miscarriage, of complications during pregnancy, and of difficulties during delivery. I will need to see you regularly to monitor your health and the baby's development. You will need to be careful, avoid heavy labor, get plenty of rest. And even with all precautions, there are no guarantees." "I understand," Winifred said, and Parker squeezed her hand tightly. "That said, Dr. Harrison continued, "you are in generally good health, which is in your favor. If you are careful and we manage this pregnancy closely, there is no reason to assume the worst. Many women your age have delivered healthy babies. It simply requires extra vigilance." They left the doctor's office with a mixture of hope and trepidation, and a list of precautions Winifred needed to follow. Parker insisted on taking over all the heavy work around the ranch, refusing to let Winifred lift anything heavier than a cooking pot. He hired a young man from town to help with the ranch work a few days a week, freeing himself to watch over Winifred more carefully. At first, Winifred chafed against the restrictions, feeling useless and frustrated. But Parker was immovable, and she gradually accepted that his protectiveness came from love and fear of losing her. So she focused on the tasks she could do safely, cooking and sewing and managing the household accounts, and let Parker handle the physical labor. As her pregnancy progressed, her body changed in ways both familiar and strange. Her belly swelled, and she felt the first fluttering movements of the baby inside her with a sense of wonder she had never expected to experience. Parker was fascinated by every change, often placing his hand on her belly to feel the baby kick, his face lighting up with amazement each time. The winter was harsh that year, with heavy snows that sometimes kept them housebound for days at a time. But the house was snug and well-provisioned, and those long winter evenings became precious time for Winifred and Parker to simply be together. They talked about the baby, about names and hopes and fears. They talked about how their lives would change, about the future they were building together. "Do you want a boy or a girl?" Parker asked one evening as they sat by the fire, Winifred knitting a tiny blanket while Parker worked on carving a wooden rattle. "Healthy," Winifred said immediately. "That is all I want. A healthy baby and to survive the birth so I can be here to raise him or her with you." "You will survive," Parker said with a confidence Winifred wished she felt. "You are strong, Winifred, stronger than you give yourself credit for." "I am terrified," she admitted. "Every day I am terrified that something will go wrong, that I will lose this baby or that I will die in childbirth and leave you alone." Parker set down his carving and moved to kneel beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "I am terrified too, but fear does not change what will happen. All we can do is take every precaution, trust in Dr. Harrison's care, and have faith that we will come through this together. And Winifred, even if the worst happens, even if we lose this baby, I will not lose you. You are my wife, my partner, my love. That does not change." His words comforted her, and she leaned down to kiss him, pouring all her love and gratitude into that connection. Spring came slowly to the Black Hills, the snow retreating inch by inch to reveal muddy ground and the first green shoots of new growth. Winifred was in her 7th month now, her belly large and prominent, her movements awkward. Dr. Harrison continued to monitor her carefully, and while he remained cautiously optimistic, he made arrangements for her to stay in town for the final weeks of her pregnancy, so she would be close to his care when her time came. In late April, Parker helped her into the wagon and drove her to Lead, where they took a room at Mrs. Callahan's boarding house. The kind proprietress had agreed to house Winifred and to help with her care, recognizing that Parker could not abandon the ranch for weeks on end, especially during the busy spring season. Parker promised to visit as often as he could, and he rode back and forth between the ranch and town nearly every day, unable to bear being apart from Winifred for long. The waiting was difficult. Winifred felt enormous and uncomfortable, her back aching constantly, her sleep disrupted by the baby's movements and her own anxiety. She tried to keep busy with sewing and reading, but mostly she watched out the window and waited, wondering when labor would begin and whether she had the strength to endure it. Parker was with her on a warm May afternoon when her water broke. He had just arrived for his daily visit, bringing her fresh strawberries from the general store, when she felt the sudden rush of fluid and knew her time had come. Parker's face went pale, but he sprang into action, calling for Mrs. Callahan to fetch Dr. Harrison while he helped Winifred to the bed. "It is going to be all right," he kept saying, though Winifred could not tell if he was reassuring her or himself. "You are strong. You can do this." Dr. Harrison arrived quickly, his face calm and professional, and he examined Winifred before nodding with satisfaction. "Labor is definitely beginning. First babies, especially for older mothers, can take time. This might be a long night, Mrs. Olsen." He was right. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Winifred had never experienced anything like this pain, waves of it that seemed to tear her apart from the inside. She clung to Parker's hand, squeezing until she thought she might break his bones, but he never flinched, never left her side. He wiped her forehead with cool cloths, whispered encouragement in her ear, and prayed silently for her survival. There were moments when Winifred thought she could not continue, when the pain was so intense she wanted to give up. But then she would look into Parker's terrified, loving eyes, and she would find the strength to push through another contraction. This was their child, their miracle, and she would fight with everything she had to bring their baby safely into the world. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Dr. Harrison shouted for her to push one more time. Winifred bore down with all her remaining strength, and she felt the baby slide free in a rush of sensation that was both relief and agony. For a terrible moment, there was silence and Winifred's heart stopped. Then she heard the most beautiful sound in the world, a baby's cry, loud and lusty and indignant. "It is a boy," Dr. Harrison announced, holding up the squalling infant for them to see. "A healthy baby boy." Parker was crying openly, tears streaming down his face as he looked at their son. Winifred was crying too, from exhaustion and relief and overwhelming love. Dr. Harrison quickly cleaned the baby and wrapped him in a soft blanket, then placed him in Winifred's arms. She looked down at the tiny face, red and wrinkled and perfect, and she fell in love all over again. This was her son, their son, a miracle she had never expected to hold. "He is perfect," Parker whispered, sitting on the edge of the bed and putting his arm around Winifred so he could look at their baby. "You did it, Winifred. You brought our son into the world." "We did it together," Winifred corrected, too tired to say much more but needing him to know how much his support had meant. Dr. Harrison finished his work and checked both mother and baby thoroughly. "Mrs. Olsen, I will not lie to you. That was a difficult labor and you lost a good deal of blood. You need complete rest for the next several weeks. No heavy activity, plenty of good food and water. But you and the baby both came through it well. You should be proud of yourself." Over the next days, as Winifred recovered her strength and learned to nurse her infant son, she and Parker discussed names. They finally settled on Paul after Parker's grandfather, with the middle name of Thomas after Winifred's father, Paul Thomas Olsen. It was a strong name for what was clearly going to be a strong-willed child, if his lusty cries were any indication. 3 weeks after the birth, when Dr. Harrison was satisfied that both mother and baby were healthy and thriving, Parker brought the wagon to take his family home. Winifred sat beside him on the bench seat, cradling Paul in her arms, and watched the familiar landscape roll past with a sense of completion. She was bringing her son home to the ranch, to the life she and Parker had built together. The house looked different to her now, not just as a home for two, but as a place to raise a child. Parker had been busy during her weeks in town, building a beautiful cradle that sat beside their bed and adding shelves to the small bedroom for the baby's things. He had even planted a sapling near the porch, a pine tree that he said would grow as their son grew, a living marker of this new chapter in their lives. The first months of motherhood were exhausting but joyful. Paul was a hungry, active baby who demanded constant attention, and Winifred felt her age in the sleepless nights and relentless care an infant required. But Parker stepped up in ways she had not expected, taking turns walking with the baby at night, learning to change diapers and give bottles when Winifred pumped milk so she could get a few hours of uninterrupted sleep. They were partners in parenting just as they were partners in everything else. As Paul grew from infant to active baby and then to busy toddler, Winifred watched with amazement. This child, this miracle, had brought a dimension to their marriage she had not anticipated. Watching Parker with his son, seeing the love and wonder on his face as he taught Paul to walk and talk and explore the world, deepened her love for her husband even more. People in town gradually accepted the unusual marriage between the older woman and the young rancher, especially when they saw how devoted Parker and Winifred were to each other and to their son. The initial gossip died away, replaced by respect for the family they had built. Mrs. Callahan became like a grandmother to Paul, and the general store owner's wife often helped Winifred with child care when she needed an extra hand. 3 years after Paul's birth, when Winifred was 45 years old and certain that there would be no more children, she discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the shock was even greater, but so was the joy. Dr. Harrison was more concerned with this pregnancy, given her age and the risks involved, but Winifred was determined. She had survived one pregnancy and birth. She could survive another. This pregnancy was easier in some ways, harder in others. She knew what to expect, which reduced some of her anxiety. But she was older, more tired, and caring for an active 3-year-old while pregnant was exhausting. Parker took on even more of the household work, and they hired a young woman from town to come help with Paul and the housework several days a week. In February of 1885, Winifred gave birth to a daughter they named Willow Rose. The labor was shorter but just as intense, and both mother and baby came through it healthy. Parker cried again when he held his daughter, this tiny girl with wisps of blonde hair and her mother's dark eyes, and he looked at Winifred with such profound love that it took her breath away. "2 miracles," he said, kissing her forehead gently. "You have given me 2 miracles when I expected none." "We gave each other miracles," Winifred corrected, too exhausted to say more but needing him to understand that this family they had created was the result of both their choices, both their love. The years that followed were full and busy. Paul grew into a bright, curious boy who loved the ranch and followed his father everywhere. Willow was a sunny, affectionate child who loved animals and flowers and had both her parents wrapped around her tiny finger. Winifred and Parker continued to work the ranch together, expanding it gradually as their circumstances allowed, building not just a home but a legacy. There were hard times. Winters when the cold was brutal and they worried about the cattle. Summers when drought threatened their water supply. The constant work and worry that came with ranching. But through it all, Winifred and Parker faced everything together, their partnership stronger with each passing year. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Parker surprised Winifred with a gift. He had commissioned a local craftsman to make a beautiful wooden sign that he hung over their porch. It read Olsen Ranch ESD, 1881, built on love. Age was just numbers, Parker said, pulling Winifred into his arms while their children played in the yard. But love, real love is timeless. What we have built here, what we continue to build every day, that is forever." Winifred looked at her husband, still young and strong at 31 while she was 52 and showing her years, and she saw no regret in his eyes, only love and contentment and joy. She thought about the frightened widow who had answered a rancher's advertisement a decade earlier, hardly daring to hope for a second chance at life. She thought about all the arguments against their marriage, all the reasons it should not have worked. And then she looked at their children playing in the sunshine, at the thriving ranch around them, at the man who had chosen her when the world said he should choose differently. And she knew that sometimes the most unlikely loves were the ones that lasted forever. "Forever," she agreed, kissing him deeply. "That is exactly what we have." As the years continued to pass, the Olsen ranch became a fixture in the Lead community. Paul grew into a responsible young man who was as passionate about ranching as his father, and Willow developed a gift for handling horses that amazed everyone who saw her ride. Parker remained devoted to Winifred through her 50s and into her 60s, never once treating her as anything less than his beloved wife and equal partner. When Winifred turned 65, Parker organized a celebration that brought together everyone whose lives they had touched over the years. Friends from town, neighboring ranchers, the now elderly Mrs. Callahan, and Dr. Harrison, who had delivered both their children and remained a close family friend. Paul, now 23, had recently married a nice young woman from Deadwood, and Willow, at 20, was engaged to the son of a neighboring rancher. At the party, Parker stood up to make a toast, his arm around his wife's waist. His blonde hair was now streaked with silver, his face more weathered from years of outdoor work, but his eyes were still as blue and his love for Winifred as evident as ever. 44 years ago, he began, and the room quieted to listen. My wife answered an advertisement I placed in a newspaper. I was 21 and lonely and in desperate need of a partner. She was 42 and had every reason to believe her best years were behind her. Society said we were foolish, that the age difference was too great, that our marriage could not possibly work. And you know what I said then and what I still say now." He paused, looking down at Winifred with such love that many in the room felt tears in their eyes. "I said that age is just numbers. What matters is the person, the character, the connection between two souls. And I said that love, real love, is timeless. It does not fade with years or wrinkles or silver hair. It grows deeper and stronger and more beautiful. Winifred, you have been my partner, my best friend, the love of my life, and the mother of my children. These 44 years with you have been the greatest gift I could ever have received. Here is to many more years together." The room erupted in applause and cheers, and Winifred stood to embrace her husband, her heart so full she thought it might burst. Around them, their children and grandchildren, their friends and community, all celebrated a love that had defied expectations, and proved that sometimes the best matches were the ones nobody saw coming. As the party continued into the evening, Winifred found a quiet moment on the porch, looking out at the ranch that had become her whole world. Paul and his wife were expecting their first child soon, which would make her a grandmother. Willow was planning her wedding for the spring. The ranch was thriving, now expanded to over 1,000 acres through years of careful management and hard work. But more than any of that, she had a husband who still looked at her like she was the most precious thing in his world. Parker joined her on the porch, slipping his arm around her waist in the familiar gesture that had become second nature over the years. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. "About how my life could have been so different," Winifred said. "If I had not had the courage to answer your advertisement, if you had not been brave enough to see past the numbers to the person. Then we both would have missed out on the greatest love of our lives, Parker said. And I, for one, am grateful every single day that you were brave enough to take that chance. So am I, Winifred said, turning to kiss him, this man who had changed everything, who had shown her that love could bloom at any age in any circumstance if two people were willing to choose each other. They stood together on the porch as the sun set over the black hills, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and crimson, and they knew that they had built something lasting and true. A love that had overcome all obstacles, a family that would carry their legacy forward. A partnership that proved love really was timeless. Inside the house, their children and grandchildren and friends continued to celebrate, but out on the porch, Parker and Winifred simply held each other and watched the day fade into night, content in the knowledge that they had found what so many people searched for their whole lives and never found. They had found their perfect match, their true partner, their forever love, and the age difference that had once seemed like such an insurmountable obstacle now seemed like nothing more than what Parker had always said it was, just numbers. Because love, real love, the kind that endures and grows and deepens with time, that love truly is timeless. And theirs would last for all the days they had left, and beyond, in the legacy they had created together.